The waitress almost laughed when the broad-shouldered stranger quietly asked for a table for 7. The restaurant was nearly empty in the bright afternoon sunlight, every window glowing with warm rays that spilled across polished wooden floors, yet something about the man's tired eyes stopped her. Before she could ask if the rest of his family was coming, he calmly repeated that he wanted a table for 7. She nodded politely, but instead of placing 7 settings, she instinctively laid out 8. The former Navy SEAL stared at the extra plate for several long seconds before his face crumbled. A man who had survived bullets, explosions, and years of war suddenly covered his eyes and began to cry in the middle of a peaceful little diner. Nobody in the room understood why one simple plate carried more weight than every medal he had ever earned. Before we continue this unforgettable story, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Every subscription helps us bring more inspiring stories that remind the world compassion still exists. The small restaurant stood beside a quiet country highway surrounded by green fields that shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Travelers often stopped there because the homemade meals tasted like memories from childhood, and because everyone who walked through the front door was greeted with a genuine smile instead of rehearsed hospitality. The waitress, Maren Holloway, had worked there for nearly 15 years. She had served exhausted truck drivers, celebrating families, lonely widowers, nervous teenagers, and soldiers returning home, but she had never seen anyone quite like the man who now sat silently staring at an empty chair. His name was Garrick Rowan. At first glance he looked intimidating. His shoulders were broad, his posture perfectly straight, and faint scars crossed one side of his face. Yet his eyes betrayed a different story. They carried the distant look shared by people who had survived things they wished they could forget. Every movement suggested discipline, but every pause hinted at unbearable memories. Maren noticed that Garrick never looked at the menu. Instead, he studied the chairs surrounding the table as though each one belonged to someone he could still see. She walked toward the kitchen, but something inside her whispered that the extra plate mattered. Most people would have removed it immediately after realizing the mistake. She didn't. Somehow it felt wrong. The owner of the diner, an elderly man named Walter Brenner, quietly watched from behind the counter. He had served in the army decades earlier and recognized the unmistakable expression of a veteran carrying invisible wounds. He simply nodded to Maren, silently encouraging her to let the moment unfold naturally. Outside, the afternoon breeze gently moved the branches of giant oak trees lining the parking lot. Families laughed while filling their cars with fuel at the station across the road. Children chased each other beneath the blue summer sky. Life continued as usual while one man sat surrounded by ghosts. After several minutes Garrick finally ordered 7 identical meals. The request puzzled everyone. Walter prepared each plate with unusual care, refusing to rush even though several customers had begun wondering what was happening. One by one, steaming dishes were placed around the table until every seat held a complete meal. Garrick closed his eyes. The restaurant became strangely quiet. Years earlier, Garrick had led a highly trained SEAL team through missions few people would ever know existed. They were not merely teammates. They were brothers who had trusted each other with their lives countless times. Every birthday had been celebrated together. Every holiday spent overseas became another shared memory. Every dangerous operation strengthened bonds that ordinary friendships could never match. There had originally been 8 members. One devastating mission changed everything. Their helicopter had encountered mechanical failure after completing a successful rescue deep inside hostile territory. Forced to land far from safety, the team fought through overwhelming danger while protecting innocent civilians they had been ordered to evacuate. Every member displayed extraordinary courage, refusing to abandon anyone despite impossible odds. Only 7 came home. The 8th man, Elias Mercer, had remained behind long enough to ensure everyone else escaped. His sacrifice allowed the helicopter carrying the rescued civilians to leave safely. Garrick never forgot watching his closest friend disappear into smoke and fire as the aircraft climbed toward the sky. For years he blamed himself. Military counselors told him survival was not betrayal. His family told him he had done everything possible. His commanders praised his leadership. None of it mattered. Every anniversary he gathered 7 meals, hoping somehow that honoring his brothers would ease the guilt of returning without the one man who deserved to live just as much as anyone else. No restaurant had ever accidentally prepared an 8th place. Until today. That single plate shattered every wall Garrick had spent years building around his heart. Tears slowly rolled down his face. Nobody interrupted. Sometimes the greatest kindness is allowing another human being permission to grieve. Several customers quietly removed their hats. Others simply bowed their heads without knowing the full story. Marin approached carefully and placed a folded napkin beside Garrick without saying a word. She understood that certain pain cannot be repaired through conversation. Presence itself can become comfort. After several minutes Garrick finally whispered that the 8th plate belonged to someone who never made it home. Those few words transformed the atmosphere inside the diner. Walter slowly walked from behind the counter and rested one weathered hand upon Garrick's shoulder. Without asking questions, he disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying an old American flag that had once belonged to his own brother, who had served many years before. He quietly placed the folded flag beside the empty plate. No speeches. No applause. Just respect. Several customers wiped tears from their eyes. One elderly woman later admitted she had lost her own son during military service decades earlier. Another customer revealed he had spent years struggling with survivor's guilt after surviving a devastating factory explosion that claimed his co-workers. Strangers who had entered simply expecting lunch gradually found themselves connected through silent understanding. Pain often hides behind ordinary faces. The strongest people are frequently carrying the heaviest burdens. As Garrick slowly ate, he noticed something remarkable. Instead of staring at him with curiosity, everyone continued eating normally while occasionally offering gentle smiles. They were allowing him dignity instead of pity. That simple difference mattered more than anyone realized. Before leaving, Garrick asked Walter how much he owed. Walter shook his head. Every customer had quietly contributed. Truck drivers. Teachers. Young parents. Retirees. College students. Without discussing it, everyone had paid for one meal. Not because Garrick was a hero. Because nobody believed grief should ever be faced alone. For the first time since losing Elias, Garrick smiled without forcing it. He thanked everyone individually before walking toward his truck beneath the brilliant afternoon sunshine. Life, however, had one more surprise waiting. Just as Garrick reached the parking lot, a little girl no older than 9 ran toward him carrying a folded drawing. Her name was Brinley. She explained that she had watched him crying through the restaurant window because she was eating ice cream outside with her grandparents. She handed him the picture. It showed 8 men standing together beneath a bright blue sky. Above them she had written only one sentence. Nobody gets left behind. Garrick's hands trembled. Children possess a remarkable ability to express truths adults often complicate. He carefully folded the drawing and placed it inside the small notebook where he kept photographs of his old team. Months passed. The memory of that afternoon refused to fade. Instead of isolating himself every anniversary, Garrick began visiting hospitals where wounded veterans recovered from physical injuries and invisible emotional scars. He shared meals with those who had nobody waiting for them. He listened more than he spoke. He discovered that healing often begins when someone feels heard. Eventually he founded a simple volunteer tradition. Every month, veterans and local families gathered around one long table. There were always 8 empty candles placed in the center. Not to celebrate death. To remember love. Each candle represented someone deeply missed by somebody present. The tradition spread from one town to another. Restaurants offered free meeting spaces. Local schools invited veterans to speak. Teenagers began interviewing elderly service members before their stories disappeared forever. Communities slowly rediscovered something modern life had nearly forgotten. People heal faster together than alone. Years later, Maren visited one of these gatherings. She hardly recognized Garrick. The sadness remained in his eyes, but it no longer defined him. Instead, compassion had taken its place. The broken soldier had become the steady hand guiding countless others through darkness he understood better than anyone. He greeted every newcomer exactly the same way. With patience. With kindness. With room at the table. Because he had learned something extraordinary that sunny afternoon inside a little roadside diner. Sometimes healing begins with one unexpected chair. One extra plate. One stranger choosing compassion over convenience. The story of that afternoon eventually reached families across the country. Many began creating their own traditions of leaving an empty place at important meals to honor loved ones who could not be present. Others simply became more attentive to lonely people sitting by themselves in restaurants, parks, or waiting rooms. One act of unnoticed kindness quietly multiplied into thousands more. Maren never considered herself extraordinary. She often insisted she had simply forgotten how to count. Yet deep inside she knew differently. Something had guided her hands that afternoon. Whether it was instinct, grace, or simple human empathy, she would never know. She only knew that leaving one extra plate untouched had reminded a grieving man he was not carrying his memories alone anymore. If this story has touched your heart, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support allows stories like this to continue reaching people who may desperately need a reminder that kindness still changes lives. Before we reach the ending, we have one special request. Please write the words, "There is always room for one more," in the comments if you believe no grieving soul should ever have to sit alone. Many people believe courage is measured on battlefields, but perhaps the greatest courage appears afterward, when broken hearts choose to keep loving despite unimaginable loss. Garrick never stopped missing Elias. No amount of time erased the empty chair. But he discovered that grief shared with compassionate strangers gradually transforms into gratitude, and gratitude becomes purpose. Long after medals lose their shine and headlines disappear, it is the quiet acts of ordinary kindness that remain alive in people's hearts. And somewhere, beneath another bright afternoon sky, another lonely traveler may walk into a small diner, ask for a table that makes no sense, and unknowingly discover that one extra place can become the beginning of an entirely new life.